Great.
Thanks, Hank and Pippa. We're really excited to be here to share our new book, the IBM Poster Program, Visual Memoranda. And we have a slideshow we'll share with you, and Shea's going to get it set up here, and we'll get into it, guys. Hank, can I get a verbal confirmation that you can see this screen?
You got it.
Excellent.
Great. Well, thanks again for having us. We're excited to be here and share with you a little bit about a project that didn't start out the way it ended, but has been a real joy to be a part of, and we've learned a lot through it. We've met some incredible people through it, and more importantly, we feel like there's a body of work here that is just exemplar and needs to be shared. And so the book is really representative of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But before we frame that up, jumping back to what Hank mentioned, this fellow named Thomas J. Watson, he was really a very prominent businessman in the middle part of the last century. He was the president of IBM. His father had been the president of IBM. And he's known for a lot of big business decisions and quotes during that period of time. IBM was a Goliath company at that time, as it is today. But he said this, he said, we are convinced that business needs its wild ducks. And in IBM, we try not to tame them. And it's actually referencing a philosopher's story from hundreds of years ago that focused on ducks flying south for the winter and someone feeding them, and after a period of time they became tame and they wouldn't fly again or travel south for the winter after that period of time. And he felt like the corporate culture, you have to be careful with it because it tends to create people who don't stay creative, who don't innovate like they should. It's kind of a natural phenomenon in a larger organization for that to sometimes happen. And so he was really a strong proponent of creativity in his employees, not just designers, but throughout his entire corporate staff. And he wanted to find ways in their organization to develop and promote and celebrate wild ducks. And in that vein of thinking, kind of start here with a totem here, which is one of the posters from this program that is probably the most famous one, I guess, outside of this effort, prior to this effort, where Ken White, one of the designers we'll discuss in a moment, actually kind of plays on words here. And he comes up with all of these negative reasons why you shouldn't do something. And the theme here becomes kind of how you stuff a wild duck, kind of the opposite of what Thomas J. Watson said. And he designed this poster as a message to employees, to be seen by employees in the campuses at IBM. And it became really kind of the leading poster. A lot fed out of this as they continued to design. So speaking again to kind of reference what IBM was at that time, this is before computing was pervasive like we have today. Instead of having everyone networked with smartphones and even the internet, where we can communicate through the web in so many ways, computers were large cabinet type products. They filled entire rooms and honestly didn't have the computing power that you have in your pocket today. But they did help manage large agencies like the IRS. They helped put man on the moon, and NASA, a lot of the Saturn V systems that helped put the trajectories over to the moon were developed by IBM. So these were highly technological products, the most advanced products on earth at the time. And Thomas J. Watson was asking himself, how do I make my company look and feel and be as technologically advanced as the products are that we're producing? And so this becomes kind of an effort by him and a fellow named Elliot Noyce, who he knew during the war. Elliot Noyce was an architect and a product designer and developed a lot of the smaller products that you might know, this electric typewriter, dictating machines, other kind of smaller product design. And Elliott brought in other designers of their day, consultant designers like Charles and Ray Eames, who were really focused on the films and the educational side of IBM. And so these consultants began to work on IBM's image and all of the visual and design information that flowed out of that company. They also hired somebody else.
So Elliott Noyes, was in charge of bringing, who we all know, Paul Rand onto the scene for the kind of graphic design communication needs for IBM. Rand, who designed all the objects you see here, created the IBM logo originally in about 1956, modifying this kind of slab serif typeface. And over the years, he even modified it more to how we know it with the kind of 8-bar and the 16-bar striped variant of the logo. And so for Paul Rand, to work with IBM, he was given all of the kind of big kind of creative direction to how the identity was applied. And this was critically important for a large organization. But Rand was certainly not doing all the kind of menial jobs and kind of pedestrian jobs. That was left to some of the in-house designers who we have featured in our book. Rand certainly created this, one of the most iconic kind of posters of the era for IBM, where you see him taking the striped variant of his logo and creating a rebus for IBM. This poster was initially for the Golden Circle Award, which recognized kind of high achievements within the company, but it has now since kind of lived on as almost kind of a secondary identity for IBM, even humanizing the company and infusing it with a little bit of design wit. Rand joked that he thought that God must have been on his side for putting the stripes on the B and how it fit perfectly with his IBM stripe logo. But interestingly enough, Rand, who's in charge of all this kind of graphic consistency across the company, was challenged by IBM kind of corporate officers. They didn't want this poster to be distributed because it was indeed bastardizing his design, but we all know that he ultimately prevailed. So Paul Rand is indeed kind of the guiding spirit for a lot of this creative work that we'll be looking at. And this document, the IBM Design Guide, of which there are several variants of it, was the kind of Bible, if you will, for the IBM in-house designers. This is a critically important document to make sure that all the corporate communications, from brochures and printed collateral to packaging and to signage, was going to conform to the same typography, same color palettes, the same layouts, and of course, the correct usage of the logo. And a lot of corporations in the 1950s and 1960s and 70s, as they grew and became multinational corporations, needed these sort of guidelines. Because IBM as a company was all across the world and certainly all across the United States. There were offices on both of the coast and in between. And so this kind of creative guide was necessary to make sure that all the individual offices and all their individual staff designers could kind of keep a consistent look. But there was one group of designers located kind of out there on their own in a little bit of the Wild West in Boulder, Colorado, that were able to kind of buck some of the kind of expected button-up IBM aesthetic and kind of corporate culture. And this is really where our story begins, is at the Boulder Design Center.
So yeah, Boulder, as Robert mentioned, is in the middle. It's not East Coast, it's not West Coast. Most of IBM's central locations were on the East Coast, and they had some on the West and many around the world. But the group in Boulder was part of a larger laboratory. So there was a manufacturing facility there, there was an engineering facility there, and then there was the design center, which housed industrial designers, graphic designers, photographers, human factors workers, all under that one department. And so, the design center had a slightly different culture. It was IBM was a very buttoned down company, very conservative, at least in the way you dressed. It was kind of the stereotypical tie and white shirt kind of company. And yet, a lot of these people that worked in the design center, they didn't take themselves too seriously. They took their work seriously, but not themselves too seriously. So there was kind of a little bit of a counterculture.
Yeah, they describe Boulder as the cowboy meets counterculture lifestyle, and I think the employees were moving to Boulder for that lifestyle indeed, and it kind of came back into their work. Yeah.
So three of the people that were in this design center that we're going to focus on, and indeed the book really features, are Ken White, John Anderson, and Tom Bloom. These were all graphic designers. Interestingly, they were almost different generations, not quite. They all worked together at the same time, but John was a little older than Ken, who was a little older than Tom. But they each came into the Boulder office. Paul Rand had actually recommended Ken White for the job, and so that was always a good thing. If Paul recommended you, this is probably a pretty good shot.
Yeah, Ken actually studied under Paul Rand at Yale, so that's where that connection was.
And Tom had worked formerly for the Rochester plant up in Rochester, Minnesota, and then had relocated to Boulder, and then was brought into the design team after that. So, and John Anderson had worked for Better Homes and Gardens magazine, Meredith Publishing, prior to that as well. So they had each kind of came to this through a little bit different channel, but they became this incredible collaborative team, and they really pushed each other.
Yeah, and these were the wild ducks that Thomas Watson was referring to. Those who were creative and innovative and willing to not be tamed, I think.
So a few years back, this all started because we met a former industrial designer who had worked in the Boulder office, and he gifted Auburn with a number of IBM things from this era, one of which was a stack of these posters, over 100 posters, beautiful silk screen and lithographic posters. And we didn't know exactly whose they were. We had to do a little legwork. And once we kind of found out who was responsible for the work itself, one of the people that came out of this was Tom Bloom. He's actually the only surviving of the three designers. And I was able to interview him, and he now lives today, he paints in this beautiful studio home in Switzerland, in the mountains of Switzerland. And we're able to meet him and interview him and talk with him about the posters. He was able to give us a lot of the credits, who did which one and that sort of thing. It was very gracious to have me in for a couple of days and let me interview him. And this becomes a lot of the kind of backstory pieces of the book too, because the work stands alone. You can see how incredible it is just looking at it. But when you hear the stories behind it, I think it gives it a little more life and makes it more interesting.
Yeah, it shows that I think we all kind of share the same sort of kind of creative process. One of the kind of experimentation, risk taking. Sometimes it's just serendipity that things kind of work out. Absolutely.
So Tom was a huge resource on this, and still is. We keep up with him about every other week. We're emailing him and keeping up with what he's doing. Another person who is a big part of this story is Roger Huey. Roger was not one of the graphic designers, but he was the photographer, and many of the posters actually feature his work as a main component of the poster itself. And so Roger still lives in Boulder, and again was very gracious to have me in and allow me to interview him, and also give me some great insights and stories into these posters and kind of the backstory and the culture of the Boulder Design Center, which was very I just found it really interesting. I got really interested in all of the people and their stories. There was a process where we had to actually scan all of these in. They're all 15 by 21, but they all had to be scanned in and edited and refined in the computer. And part of designing and building the book was Robert really designed the book completely around the content of the posters, but part of it was making sure the posters held up in the book as well. And so we were trying to really very carefully calibrate the printing to match the original silk screen inks, which are incredibly vibrant. I mean, there's nothing like seeing these in person, but being able to actually work with the press very carefully to dial those colors in was a big part of the plan.
Yeah, so the IBM Poster Program. So this is the the kind of the core of our book. Going through the 100+ posters that we had in our archive led us to kind of two main discoveries. The first was kind of considering what is the content of these posters. So these posters were done as essentially memos for staff. So they would be hung in and around the various kind of company headquarters and offices. And so there were often times that we kind of discovered that the themes were, or the posters could be divided into series and themes. Series were posters that were maybe advertising savings bonds, something that was popular in the 70s. There was a poster series that was trying to promote the changing our measurements to the kind of international systems of measurements. IBM was a big proponent of that in the 1970s, although it clearly did not take. Management development, kind of promoting kind of management skills. So we have a bunch of series of posters, but then we also had themes that we discovered within the range of posters. And the themes were the kind of top of mind reminders. Even today we got a reminder about email phishing schemes. This was the sort of themes of a lot of their posters. Security, very important for a company like IBM. Equal opportunity, kind of promoting diversity and inclusion essentially back then. Health and safety, quality and excellence, sustainabilities, things that they were always trying to remind the employees as they related back to some of the brand tenets of IBM, as even dictated in the core values from Thomas Watson.
And I can't emphasize enough just how amazing it is, a period of time where a company had the kind of resources IBM had and was able to spend custom silk screen money on posters for their employees to go on bulletin boards. This is not advertising, this is not external promotion, but internal bulletin board fodder, as it were. And just knowing that they had enough, that they were wealthy, the company was rich, and they were throwing money at things that today you would probably like say, don't spend your money there. But it gave us this beautiful artwork.
Yeah, and so these posters were designed deliberately to be kind of placed in hallways. In fact, Ken White, before even kind of developing the poster system, developed this display system, what they called information boards, which we kind of consider kind of to be these bulletin boards. Each one, I believe, was 4 by 8 in size, and within those information boards, you could hang 2 posters, of which the entire series was scaled to be 15 inches by 21 inches. So every poster is 15 by 21 inch size. And then within that information board, you could have a couple 8.5 by 11 announcements hung as well. And so this information board would be 100 in a single building, like you kind of see here, multiplied then by various headquarters across the US. They were sometimes producing up to 2,000 copies of a single poster that would then be distributed all across all the headquarters and campuses within IBM. So it was an interesting to see this kind of systematic design approach and kind of standardizing the form of it.
And once word got out, the Boulder designers just had this synergy going on this. And once word got out across all these campuses around the world, Ken and John's and Tom's posters started actually getting reprinted around the world. So it started out kind of in Boulder, and it just grew and grew and grew. And so everybody started to recognize that team as being the graphic design group, really at the time. So
and as the sign of every good design is, they were stolen or taken off the walls repeatedly, and many IBM alumni we are hearing stories of them having these.
That's how we ended up with them.
That's how we ended up with them. So we're going to start kind of taking a look at a couple of the series and themes.
Yeah. So the first one here is creativity and accomplishment. So this was an identity system actually that Ken White developed over a couple of days. He kind of left the office, disappeared, Had been challenged by the group he was working with to develop a mark that could be carried over for an annual dinner, an annual event that IBM had for awards. It was an award dinner, and it was called the Creativity and Accomplishment Awards. And they gave it to employees who went over and above their typical tasks to innovate for the company. And one of the cool things about this design is the mark itself shows up on a number of different things, but just the symbolic meaning of having the two pieces here. So, you know, you think of an identity kind of being a singular thing, but in this case, kind of having co-marks that work together, one being the opposite of the other in terms of its form giving. And the green on the left symbolizes creativity, the creative spark, the external spark, and the square on the right represents the internal accomplishment that happens through that creative spark. So you can't really have the accomplishment, the individual accomplishment, without the creative spark. And those two kind of fit together and show up in a number of different pieces. The posters themselves, these were actually to introduce the mark, I think, when they first launched the identity. But then you see it start to spread across many of the different posters. So this gave Ken and Tom and John all of the creative freedom to play with it in different ways and focus on it in sometimes more formal, sometimes less formal ways. But it shows up and it becomes that annual event that becomes, employees start to look forward to it a few weeks before that time.
I mean, they branded this whole series and used it for years, and in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah. In addition to that, it actually got translated into physical gifts and exhibitions and things that were three-dimensional. So a lot of the industrial designers worked with Ken to kind of embody it in signage and in displays and in gifts, salt and pepper shakers, handkerchiefs, ties, all sorts of things that were given away to employees began to incorporate this identity system for creativity and accomplishment.
Yeah, and so another kind of thematic theme that we have is security. So you can imagine a company like IBM who's, you know, creating some of the most innovative products of their time. Security was a big concern, both for just kind of patents and kind of private kind of company needs, but also national kind of Cold War concerns. And so this was probably one of the most reoccurring themes that we saw in a lot of the posters was reminding all the staff that security is of utmost importance. And what's so kind of great about this is how creative they were able to be with kind of a single theme. And that's something that kind of most impressed us with this whole body of work. The examples here have, you know, their kind of aesthetic rooted in the kind of Swiss modernist style, which these designers all revered at the time, and we still do today. And in fact, part of the impetus to kind of create this poster program was that they wanted to have work that was as good as a lot of the Swiss designs seen in magazines such as Graphis. Because remember, these were in-house designers doing maybe the kind of pedestrian jobs and following Rand's guidelines. But this gave them an opportunity to kind of break out of that a little bit. So we saw a lot of posters that were using this kind of typographic style as the kind of main aesthetic force. Company policy was that you always had to have your badge on. So Badger, the badgeless. I think it was said that they were actually not allowed to put this one up because corporate management thought it was maybe a little too aggressive.
Yeah.
But the idea was that you needed to call out your employees if they didn't have their badge on. The figurative typography in the security leak was one of my favorites. Simple, creative messaging that, again, kind of attracts your attention and kind of reminds you in a kind of clever way. And mom, dad, sis, and brother. One that is reminding you to make sure that your company workplace talk stays within the workplace. Don't let your family in on the potentially top secret work that you are doing within the office.
It was interesting on that note, Wendy White, the daughter of Ken White, told me in talking with her on the phone just a year or so ago that some of the posters, the first time she saw them, were actually in a school room where her teacher's husband had worked at IBM and had stolen them off the walls and put them in their classroom because they were kind of confidential. Again, it was not for public consumption. So these were just for IBM employees.
This was one of the funny stories that we learned about. This was a photographic treatment or photographic dominant poster that Roger Huey, the staff photographer, did the photography on. They used Ted Kelly, an industrial designer,
Yeah,
as the model for this shot. Poor security habits are tough to swallow, and I'm not sure if it's showing on your screen, but there's a little bit of type in the paper that's in his mouth that says IBM Confidential. Now, the Boulder offices were the kind of cowboy culture, the renegades, if you will, within the company. And if you notice, Ted Kelly here has his striped shirt. Well, that was frowned upon IBM. They, in fact, made Roger Huey hire a photo retoucher to create the white shirt of the model, because that was the company policy, that everybody needed to be in their kind of button-up white clothing. And another kind of interesting policy that we maybe don't have as much today because we're so digital was locking your desk at night. And in fact, in this reminder, a photograph from Rogers of the Front Range there in Boulder of the Rocky Mountains sets that reminder out in kind of an ominous way. And you could, in fact, have your pay docked if you did not clean your desk at night and lock it up before going home.
So one of the other cool things about IBM's resources was that they could afford to treat their employees in extraordinary ways. They would open their campuses up once a year for open houses. They would rent out an entire theme park for the day to let their employees hang out in it. They would, I think they bought the house one night for a Disney on Ice event or something, so that all of the employees could go. So it was, anything that was going on in Denver, they had a hand in some ways. But these posters, the events and programs posters, oftentimes were a way to kind of celebrate all that IBM was doing for their employees and giving them opportunities to grow unto themselves. And so Family Day was one example of that, where you could bring your family to work. And this set of posters, kind of each one kind of in its own hand a little bit, but kind of cueing off of the primary colors, kind of the Alexander Calder thematics of the day showing up there in a fun way. So this would get employees fired up a few weeks in advance again for what was going on. This one being a really beautiful one that Tom Bloom did. It was an interesting story. He was working on this one after hours, which wasn't uncommon actually. The graphic designers would come in on the weekends and work on them. He was working on this one after hours and was trying to come up with an inspiration piece to kind of celebrate the Christmas party, to celebrate the Christmas event. And he noticed, he had these clothespins, the old-fashioned kind of wooden clothespins that were laying all over his desk, and he was trying to figure out what he could do with those. And then the janitor walks through and starts to clean the office, and he notices this feather duster that the person was using to clean the office, and decides that, wait, that's interesting. Let me grab that real quick. And he took that and the clothespins back to the stat camera, which was a large device we don't use anymore, but was a large camera that essentially could translate three-dimensional photographic to two-dimensional full scale, and then you could use that and create line art or other pieces out of it. And he shot that and developed it, and then developed this beautiful toy soldiers illustration, really from those pieces of clothespins and scaled feather dusters. And this just the colors on this are amazing. It celebrates everything that is Christmas, and that's a little random for IBM, a little playful, right? So playful that Paul Rand actually complimented Tom on this one. This was one of Paul Rand's favorites that kind of came out of this program. So and you can kind of see that a little bit. I almost feel like, it's definitely one that could
kind
be
of
ran.
early Paul Rand design style for sure.
Yeah. Another area that was a series was the Equal Opportunity Series. So
Yeah, so 1964, we think we have the Civil Rights Acts passed, and by 1972 we have Equal Opportunity Employment Act passed as well. And so IBM, in several instances, was a little bit even ahead of the game of the U.S. kind of government. They were already promoting kind of equal opportunity and diversity within their company. Again, they were interested in hiring the best and the brightest, no matter where they came from. So it was really kind of a hip and kind of company in that regard. But certainly by 64 and 72, when laws start kind of mandating it, IBM kind of fits right within that. This poster, the Equal Opportunity Pattern for Progress, designed by Ken White, is an interesting one because it has a lot of similarities to the nature of computing of that era. Again, this is not digital computing. This is computing that's using a punch card, like you see here, done in an analog sort of fashion. And so the kind of the particles of the poster certainly have a reminiscent feel to the kind of punch cards that were used in computing at the time, creating these interesting patterns and sequences of kind of squared shapes. Words, list, and kind of copywriting was the big thing for these designers. Partly it's a way to kind of maybe arrive at a quick kind of typographic solution and then to be able to screen print it, just the nature of the production. But it always kind of allowed for kind of the ideas to kind of come forth more quickly. The one on the left, the kind of listing of various kind of ethnicities and colors and races and whatnot, showing the kind of inclusion of equal opportunity, or the really kind of typographically clever one that equal opportunities within people, and it's within all of us. And then the one on the far right, one of another one of Ken White's kind of more famous posters, Equal Opportunity is Colorblind, rendering Rand's logo as if it is a kind of colorblind test, something that you would maybe have to look at to kind of see the letter forms within it. And if we kind of zoom in on this one, I want to take a moment to really highlight the craftsmanship of these silkscreen posters. This is a 4-color print, 2 grays and 2 pinks, that were printed by Fred Gerardo, who was a screen printer in Denver, and he and his family, in fact, printed all of the posters, and was really a critical collaborator within this entire poster program, because
absolutely uncompromising, really.
Uncompromising quality when it came to the printing fidelity, and looking in on this poster at a close level shows just the registration and the kind of purity of the colors and of the hues, and that's really what makes partly what makes this collection so phenomenal is the quality and fidelity of them. And we have over 100 of these featured within our book. We don't have time to go through all of them, but it is a really impressive collection that's coming from a single organization, a single headquarters, and 3 really committed graphic designers and photographers that were the wild ducks, if you will.
Yeah. When I've interviewed Tom in 2017, fall of 2017, it was a fun adventure. It was kind of going to a place I'd never been. It was meeting someone I admired already from their work decades prior. But he opened up to me. He talked about all of the stories. He was truly wanting to share with young people, with our students, and still is wanting to teach. He's always excited about teaching and sharing with students the work that he's done and the stories behind it. But when he started reminiscing and thinking about the totality of the work, all of these posters, all of that work, unbelievable quality, unbelievable creativity, all for just bulletin boards. He said it takes four things to make a design successful. And I started to perk up at this point. So, oh, this sounds like something that's quotable, right? So what are those things, Tom? He says, number one, it takes a great client that understands they have a problem that design can solve. Not all clients understand that design can solve a problem. They have some other idea or some other track they're already on. Do you have a client that understands that they have a problem that design can solve? Number two, he said, you got to have producers who are of the highest level of professionalism. And that would be Fred Gerardo, the silk screeners, whose level of craft is so high that they're going to hold your design intent right where it needs to be. And they're not going to compromise or push one way or the other just to make it happen or hit the shortest distance between 2 points. They're actually trying to hold your design intent in place. Then he said, number three, you got to have creative collaborators. That would be the design center team, Tom, Ken, John Anderson, who pushed each other, who really challenged each other each day to do better work than the day before. And they were collaborators. They were always working together, no matter who was kind of lead on the poster. If you don't have people you're working with that aren't pushing you, your design's not going to be successful either. And then lastly, and maybe a little less obvious, and I think really reflective, he said, you got to have effective management. This is so IBM, it's like, he really praised his boss, Jack Stringer, who was really responsible for assembling the team in the first place and giving them the resources. Do you have a champion? Do you have the effective management that champions your design and enables it to thrive? And this becomes really the four things. And he said, when you've got those four things, boy, do you have it good. And for me, that was IBM. And so that's what we are excited to share with you about in this book is that little sliver of amazing work that's been hidden all these years and was just for IBM employees, but it's so stunning.
Yeah.
It's worthy of being able to be seen outside of that. So
absolute craftsmanship. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We're going to see if we could stop our screen sharing here and all right, Hank.
Yes. Yeah, we got time for some questions here, maybe from some of the students. If you have some questions, now's a great time. I think it was amazing just watching those posters and the typography. If you go back and you study some of that old typography, students, it is amazing, the Swiss design. Some of you have been involved in that recent note. You just look at the color values and how they use them. And one of the amazing things that I was thinking about when you were talking about Paul Rand was in that poster with the little dots inside, that none of there was no program called Illustrator. And that was all by hand. Imagine that. And the
that's the real irony. That's such an irony. Here's this massive computer company, and they didn't use computers. It wasn't until the mid '80s, right, when that kind of
desktop publishing. Yeah.
Well, let's turn it over and open. Stephanie, are you here?
I sure am. Yeah, everybody can go ahead and unmute themselves if they have a question or raise your hand. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mira. I'm in the master's program with Portfolio Center in Furman, and thank you so much for giving us this wonderful presentation today and sharing your book with us. I had a question about, through your handling of the posters, what was most striking about your research, or did anything surprise you or stuck with you most, either through your interview with Tom or your actual physical interaction with the posters themselves, either design-wise or otherwise?
So that's a big question. I'll share what kind of hit me, and it may be different from Robert. The color is pretty
Yeah.
stunning on these things. I mean, when you get them in good calibrated light, it's like the inks are really saturated, and there's a lot of ink on a lot of these posters. And so when you start to put them out in mass and look at many of them at one time, I mean, I can't tell you how many times we went through
Yeah.
them curating different things for shows and exhibitions, and it was like, no, we can't take that one out. No, we can't take that one out. It's just too good. And
Yeah.
so we're like in love with all of them in a way, which is kind of funny. But I always found it really funny that Tom had moved on. This was just such amazing work. But Tom came back he studied in Switzerland.
Studied in Switzerland. Yeah.
Under Weingart, I think, and then came back and into IBM in the 90s again and worked more in management, and then kind of abandoned it. And we kind of surprised him one day when we came out and, hey, are you the guy that did these amazing posters? And so for me, it was kind of like this gem, this treasure that you're kind of opening up that I don't know. I can't pick one that I love more than the rest, but
I'll kind of piggyback on that. I think the stories from Tom and from Roger about behind the scenes kind of making, if you will, was one of the most striking things. I mean, the memories of, a photo shoot that they did for the poster, or the memory of, oh, I remember when we put this one out there, everybody, said we couldn't hang it up. Having those memories of your kind of past creative work was really kind of special, and I think kind of really kind of endearing, something we can all kind of relate to. The other thing that I think was kind of most striking and that I love about this poster program is this kind of design systems thinking behind it. The information boards has a particular size, then all the posters are going to have a particular size. And I don't know if we mentioned this. I mean, they were doing these once a week. That was their kind of goal, is to put one out per week. And so they were doing it, after hours, on top of their day-to-day job duties. And so being able to come to that kind of quick design solution, which is, why a lot of them have that kind of Swiss style or kind of typographic voice. And I just think that sort of kind of creative activity is really inspiring.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Nani Guna. I am a first quarter student at the Atlanta campus studying art direction. The 4 kind of points that you made at the end really stuck with me, and I'm wondering, the first point was, you need a great client who understands that design can solve their problem. So I'm wondering how when it's a problem of design, or like the problem lies somewhere else.
Well, I think, and Robert can probably speak to this better from the graphic standpoint, but I think a lot of it is about building a relationship of trust to a certain degree with a client, having the kind of integrity and authenticity to shoot straight with them if you feel like what they're looking for really isn't about design, if they've already locked in on something or moved, not really allowing a creative solution to thrive. So I think some of it is just about cultivating maybe the client relationship a little bit, but I'll leave it to Robert there too. So.
Yeah, you almost have to kind of ask yourself, what is design, or define that first, right? I mean, if we think of Paul Rand, I think he said everything is design, right? And we can broaden our definition of design as kind of broad as possible, and in doing so, everything is a design problem that can be solved. I mean, it may not be a typographic problem or solution. It may be something that's kind of non-formal, but but as design as a kind of plan of action. If we think of it as that maybe as the core of what design is, then any problem needs to be solved with a plan of action that's going to relate to other kind of parts and solutions. So
and I think one of the things is when you work in a large corporation like IBM or a big company, there's kind of a framed design problem, and that is help the organization. Whatever design problems occur within that organization, it could be a customer, it could be a design brief, it could be a poster that's on the wall. For Roger Huey, he's a photographer, he's a staff photographer, he had his own studio, Lindhoff cameras, all this stuff. He shot work that needed to go in manuals and posters and all sorts of things. but he also ran into an engineer one day who needed a super high speed shot of something that was happening inside a box, inside of a machine, and they couldn't get the shot. I mean, there was no camera to get that shot, and he built one. So he modified a camera for IBM. So this was science work. It wasn't even like what we would call like creative design work, but here's a photographer solving a design problem within that organization, helping that organization, you know. And one day he's photographing, doing art direction with Ken White, and the next day he's in there with the engineers doing something. So yeah, it could be anything. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. I am in my third quarter at the Atlanta campus in art direction. My question, I don't know if you all would necessarily be the best answer or the person that made the posters, but I just wanted to know, I do screen print as well. And so something that really struggles for me is how I can pitch the skills that I picked up in screen print to big companies that don't traditionally use it or need it. Because I've never even known that IBM would know anything about screen printing. So it just seems really out of the ballpark for me. So what's something that you would suggest for me to tell other big companies about the skills that I have in screen printing?
Wow. That's
I mean, well, I think there's a couple of examples outside of IBM. I mean, we saw a lot of kind of parallels with this poster work at IBM, big tech company, them doing these kind of screen prints with, and I don't know if it's still kind of in existence at Facebook. They had the analog design lab or something like that. That you know, some Facebook product designers decided to bring in some screen printing equipment and letterpress printing equipment, and have this kind of creative outlet for the work. And then it kind of started kind of coming through to their campuses and creating internal posters for Facebooks. So I think there is kind of these opportunities. I think if anything, you just kind of show that you have this kind of broadened skill set. And I think stuff like screen printing, and always kind of lump it also with letterpress printing, are such great antidotes to our hyper digital world, to be honest. And I think there is some great kind of merit in having that skill, and you kind of frame it as an extension of your kind of creative life, really.
I mean, that goes back to the hook of these posters. I said the color, but really it was the printing, and that unbelievable physical artifact that just stood out from like what Robert said, from all of the digital stuff we have. Anytime you have a client who really can benefit from that physical artifact that goes beyond what the digital communication is, I think that's a huge opportunity. So yeah.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you guys so much.
Sure, thanks.
Great.
Some more questions?
What'd you say? Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, say, guys, I believe your book is now available, maybe on Amazon, published by Lund Humphreys.
Right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. So I'll make the hard sell, Hank. LundHumphreys.com. You can order it directly. Our publisher is in the UK, but they're shipping. They can ship out to you if you're stateside. So you can order it from LundHumphreys.com. We put together a website, visualmemoranda.com, as well, where you can see some of the kind of sample spreads and make the order as there also. Amazon will start stocking it, I believe, in the middle of May, but go directly through the publisher and you can get your copy. Hank, you said you bought 50, right?
Not 50. I have 5, and I've given them away as gifts, and they make great gifts. And and you guys should get to know a lot about IBM and what they have done and what they are still doing to this very day. Because I think one of the things, you can look at these posters and you can figure like, how can I bring those forward into a different conversation today?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's such an amazing company that plays behind the scenes on so many. There's probably something at least 4 or 5 times in your day that you touch that IBM is highly involved in. You just don't know. And because they're a lot in the background. But these posters were amazing by some people. Think about yourselves doing something like this, Jasmine, was that you that brought up about the silk screening? Or yes, and like get together again, start skill screening some. That's a great way to get back together and a little bit and try some things that you haven't done that way. It's so much fun, and it just
Yeah, and Hank, let me, yeah, one of the lessons out of this, I really do think is the behind the scenes making. I mean, of these 3 designers and photographers. I mean, they were going, beyond their daily routines. They were in-house graphic designers, and now in-house design has gotten, more companies are recognizing the value of design. But this was an opportunity to be like, hey, I want to do more creatively. I have more kind of design ideas, in my head. And here's the place where we can enact on them. I think that's one of the great things about this profession is that you can do anything with it. We are resourceful as designers, I think.
Well, guys, thank you all for coming today and doing this. This has been really interesting to hear all of this background. And I was going to say you should write a book. You did, and we should buy your book.
LonHumphreys.com.
Well, we thank you for the opportunity to share and to share this amazing work, and we hope it has been inspiring and helps you in your work. That's the ultimate goal. So
Absolutely.
thank you.